We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis in Mesechet Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 12b. And the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing a question. Let's say a person has a piece of meat next to another piece of meat, which is from a carbon shlamim after zrika, and the person says this should be like this. So the question was, are we saying bi'ikaro kamatvis? Are we saying that he is saying that it should be like carbon shlamim in general, which is usr, and this should be usr? Or are we saying no, right now this piece of meat of the carbon shlamim actually might be mutter because it's after zrikas damim, and so therefore it does not create the isser. We don't say that it's going like the bi'ikaro, like the standard carbon shlamim, and he means to say an isser. Rather, we say it goes like it is right now, and therefore it does not create an isser if right now this meat of the carbon shlamim is mutter because it's after zrikas damim. And so the Gemara in the previous summit brought a proof from the Mishnah, which is coming up. The Mishnah says that if a person is matvis and says this should be like this, and it's talking about a piece of truma, so then that does not create the isser because you have to do it with a davar hanadar. It has to be something which the isser was created through a neder. And truma, that piece of truma, the isser was not created through a neder. And so the Gemara drew an inference and said, but let's say we're talking about trumas lachmei toda, so there we're talking about the truma of the bread, the portion of the breads of the carbon toda that go to the Kohanim, that was created through a neder, because a carbon toda, that was created through a neder. And so the Gemara drew an inference that would be aser. And so the Gemara now points out, trumas lachmei toda la'achar zrikas damim. It's the same thing. The trumas lachmei toda is something that's after the zrikas damim. They've already sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach. We're already at a point in time where it's no longer aser, and so therefore it seems like bi'ikaro kamatvis. It's still that the hatzfasa still works. It still becomes aser because we don't care what it is right now. We care that be'etzim you're tying it to something which is prohibited through a neder. And the Gemara says, no, you could just change the inference. Ema, just say that when the Mishnah says truma is mutter, don't assume from there that trumas lachmei toda is aser. Rather, ketrumas halishka aser. Rather, it just means to say that trumas halishka is aser. The trumas halishka was again where they had this money of the machas shekel that was donated into the chamber in the Beis Hamikdash, and they would take from some of that money and they would fill up 3 boxes. And so that has nothing to do with zrikas damim, and it would not prove anything about the original question of bi'ikaro kamatvis or kedahashta kamatvis. But the Gemara says if you're going to make that inference, aval trumas lachmei toda mai. But then what would be the case by trumas lachmei toda? Mutter, are you saying that would be mutter? But if that was the case, so then lisni lachmei toda. So then the Mishnah should say lachmei toda. They changed the girsa to trumas lachmei toda. V'kol shekain trumas, and for sure regular truma. In other words, if trumas lachmei toda, if you try to be matvis in that, it's mutter. So then the Mishnah should say that. And obviously it's going to be true by regular truma as well, that if you try to be matvis in regular truma, it's going to be mutter. And the Gemara says, no, that's exactly what the Mishnah means. Hakamash malon, the Mishnah is teaching us trumas lachmei toda trumasohi. That trumas lachmei toda is the same as regular truma, meaning to say when the Mishnah says kitrumaso, that if a person tries to be matvis in truma, that includes all kinds of truma. It includes regular truma, it includes trumas lachmei toda as well. And the Gemara continues, V'ba same. If you want, I could say another answer. Trumas lachmei toda nami kodem zrikas damim hu. You could have trumas lachmei toda even before the zrikas damim. It doesn't have to be that trumas lachmei toda is after zrikas damim. It could be that trumas lachmei toda takes place before zrikas damim, and then it would be no proof that bi'ikaro kamatvis, because even at the moment that the person is being matvis, it's before zrikas damim. It's at a time of isser. Kegon daf rishinu belisha, because you could have a situation where at the time of the kneading of the dough, that's when you separate the truma of the lachmei toda, as the Gemara explains. V'chihadu Rav Da'amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna mar Shmuel. It's like what Rav Tuvi bar Kisna said that Shmuel said. Lachmei toda she'afon ba'arba chalos yotza. Says, let's say you have lachmei toda, instead of making 40 lachmei toda, the way that the lachmei toda worked was there were 4 different kinds of breads, and there were 10 of each kind of bread, and they would take 1/10 of each kind. They would take 1 loaf of each kind of bread, and that would be the truma that they would give to the Kohen. So Shmuel said that even if you just do 4 breads, you don't do 40 breads, you only do 4, 1 of each type, that's also going to fulfill the obligation in terms of lachmei toda. And the Gemara says, V'ksivar boim, but doesn't the pasuk say you need 40 pieces of bread, and here you only have 4? And so the Gemara says, le mitzvah, that's just for a mitzvah, that's like lechatchila, but if you have 4, that's still going to be okay. But the Gemara still says, V'boile mishkal truma, but how are you going to take truma? Because again, the way it worked was, out of every 10, there were 4 types of bread, 10 of each type, and you took 1/10, 1 of each type to give as truma. How are you going to take truma if you only have 4 breads total? And the Gemara says, V'chitema d'shakal chadar rifta al kula. Now if you're going to say that you just take 1 loaf, meaning 1 entire type of bread, and give that as truma, and keep the other 3, those will be the lachmei toda that aren't truma. But you can't do that. V'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, echon mikol carbon, it says 1 of each kind kind of carbon, shelo yitol mi carbon al chaver. You can't take from one carbon on its friend. Meaning you can't take from one type of bread truma for another type of bread. You have to take the truma from each kind of bread. And if you're going to say the shakel prusa mikol chad v'chad, that you'll just take a slice from each bread and use that as truma. But we learned in the Mishnah echad one shelo yitol prusa, that you shouldn't take a slice; it has to be a loaf. And so again, how are you going to separate the truma lachmei toda if you only have 4 breads, one of each type? And the Gemara answers, Ella, rather daf reshinu belisha. The case over here is that you actually separate it as dough during the time of the kneading process. The shakel chada mechametz, you take one from the chametz bread, v'chada min chalos, and you take one from the chalos, v'chada min rekikim, and you take one from the rekikim, v'chada min revucha, and you take one from the revucha. Those are the 4 kinds of loaves of bread that are used when it comes to the lachmei toda. And so here you see a situation where you're separating already by the time of the lisha, that's before the zrikas damim, and therefore you have no proof from this Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Lema ketanoi, let us say this is a machlokes tanoim. Harei olai kebechor, let's say a person says this piece of meat, I'm treating it like a bechor. Rabbi Yaakov oser, Rabbi Yehuda mater. Rabbi Yaakov says it's oser, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter. And the Gemara says, hey chidami, what's the case over here? If we're talking, if we're going to say it's before the zrikas damim, so my time of demand shari, what's the reason of the one who says it's permitted? For sure the bechor before zrikas damim is aser, and this piece of meat should be aser. V'ilachar zrikas damim, and if we're talking about after zrikas damim when the bechor is mutter, so my time of demand aser, what's the reason of the one who says that it's prohibited? Elolav, rather is it not that the case is as follows, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph.